Russia is Magog, Moscow is Meshech. It's been preached as fact. But the Hebrew doesn't say that. The history doesn't say that. And what Ezekiel actually wrote is far more powerful than a war prediction. Open almost any modern prophecy book and you'll find it. A detailed map claiming that Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 predict a specific end times war. Pastors preached it from pulpits. Documentaries presented it as settled fact. And for many believers, questioning this reading felt like questioning Scripture itself. But there's a problem. To understand what Ezekiel actually wrote, we cannot start with a modern map. We have to start in the ancient world, in a place of unimaginable loss. The year is roughly 593 BC. The kingdom of Judah has collapsed. Its finest citizens have been torn from their homeland and marched in chains to Babylon. These are not soldiers, they are priests, artisans, families, ordinary people whose entire world has been shattered. These people had lost everything they believed made them who they were. The temple, the dwelling place of God on earth, was a smoking ruin. The throne of David was empty. The promises of God felt like ancient fairy tales. Jerusalem, the city of God, had fallen, not to some pagan accident, but to Nebuchadnezzar's armies. The walls were broken, the holy vessels were carried away as trophies, and the people of God sat in a foreign land and asked the question that grief always asks: has God forgotten us? They had been dragged from the land of promise and deposited in the land of their enemies. Every morning they woke to Babylonian gods on every street corner. Every evening they fell asleep to the sound of a foreign language. Their identity was unraveling. And it was into this shattered community, this furnace of despair, that the prophet Ezekiel began to speak, not with gentle comfort at first, but with visions so strange, so overwhelming, that they would echo across 3,000 years of human history. Ezekiel chapter 38 opens with a startling divine command. God tells Ezekiel to set his face against someone called Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. God tells Ezekiel to set his face against this figure and prophesy against him. And immediately a list of names unfolds, a coalition of peoples assembling from the far edges of the known world. Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, Beth Togarmah, these are names that meant something specific to an ancient Israelite. They were not mysteries. They were not codes waiting for a future generation to crack. They were known peoples. We find these exact names not only in the Bible, but in Assyrian and Babylonian records. Cuneiform tablets from royal archives reference these peoples as real ethnic groups and kingdoms located in what is now modern Turkey, the Caucasus region, and the areas around the Black Sea. To Ezekiel's audience, these were not abstract symbols. They were the peoples who lived at the farthest edges of the known world, the remote, threatening, barely understood nations of the distant north and east. They represented the outer rim of civilization. But somewhere in the last 2 centuries, something shifted. Modern interpreters began reading these ancient names through an entirely different lens. Interpreters began matching these ancient tribal names with modern nation-states. Rosh became Russia, Meshech became Moscow, Tubal became Tobolsk. A prophetic geography written for 6th century exiles was suddenly redrawn as a map of Cold War geopolitics. Best-selling books declared with certainty that Ezekiel had predicted a Russian-led invasion of Israel. The prophecy was transformed from an ancient oracle of hope into a modern military forecast, and it sold millions of copies. And millions of believers absorbed this interpretation as settled biblical truth. Sermons were preached, documentaries were produced. The words Gog and Magog became synonymous with geopolitical anxiety rather than theological promise. But here is the question that almost nobody paused to ask. What did these words mean to the people who first heard them? Ezekiel was not writing a foreign policy briefing. He was not drafting an intelligence report for a future generation of news watchers. He was standing among broken people and speaking a word from God. He was delivering a message about sovereignty, about the ultimate fate of every power that sets itself against the purposes of God. And it was a message of breathtaking hope if we hear it the way it was meant to be heard. And to understand that message fully, we have to look carefully at the names, the language, and the literary world that Ezekiel was drawing from. And that journey begins with one of the most overlooked chapters in the entire Bible, Genesis chapter 10, the Table of Nations. A table that maps not just geography, but theology, a record of how the ancient Israelites understood the structure of the entire human world and every people in it. In Genesis chapter 10, every name that appears in Ezekiel's prophecy, Gomer, Magog, Tubal, Meshech, appears as a descendant of Noah's son Japheth. These are not random names. They are part of Israel's foundational genealogical map of humanity. Gomer was not a code word for Germany. It was the name of a people group descended from Japheth, associated with the ancient Cimmerians who lived near the Black Sea. This was common knowledge in the ancient world. These were real peoples in real places, but in Ezekiel's prophetic vision, they were about to become something more, something that would reshape how Israel understood the very nature of evil and the very character of God. Now that we have established the historical world Ezekiel was writing in, we can begin the deeper investigation, the language, the structure, and the literary strategy behind this extraordinary prophecy. Let us begin with the name itself, Gog. Who or what is Gog? Some scholars have connected Gog to a historical figure named Gyges, known in Akkadian texts as Gugu, the king of Lydia. His name appears in Assyrian royal inscriptions from the 7th century BC, just decades before Ezekiel's ministry. In the Hebrew mind, the north was not just a direction, it was a symbol. It was the direction from which chaos came, the direction from which empires descended to destroy. For centuries, Israel's greatest threats had arrived from the north, not because of some geographic coincidence, but because the major invasion routes into the land of Israel all descended through the same northern corridors between mountains and sea. The Assyrians had come from the north, sweeping down through Syria to devastate the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC. An entire civilization was erased, 10 tribes scattered into the winds of history. The Babylonians had come from the north, taking the same ancient routes to besiege Jerusalem, breach its walls, and carry its people into exile. The north was not neutral territory. It was the direction of nightmares. So when Ezekiel described a vast enemy coalition assembling in the far north and descending upon a restored Israel, his audience did not need a geopolitical briefing. They felt it in their bones. The north meant danger. The far north meant the ultimate danger. Notice the language Ezekiel uses in describing this invasion. He speaks of horses, horsemen, shields, bucklers, a great company with weapons of war. But the descriptions are deliberately overwhelming, almost impossibly vast. He describes an army so large it covers the land like a cloud. That is not military intelligence, that is poetry. That is prophetic literature doing what it always does, using symbolic scale to communicate a theological truth. Shields, bucklers, swords, but notice what is missing from the text. There is no strategic plan, no siege tactics, no battle formations. The army assembles, it descends, and then something extraordinary happens. And then God declares that He Himself will intervene with pestilence, blood, overflowing rain, hailstones, fire, and brimstone. The destruction comes not from Israel's army, but from heaven itself. Israel does not fight this battle. Israel does not swing a single sword. The entire confrontation is between Gog and God. The people of Israel are spectators to their own deliverance. This is not a military prophecy. This is a theological drama. It is a courtroom scene disguised as a battlefield, and the verdict was decided before the armies ever assembled. Ezekiel then describes something remarkable in chapter 39. After the destruction of Gog's army, Israel spends 7 years burning the weapons left behind. These numbers, 7 years, 7 months, are not logistical calculations. They are liturgical. 7 is the number of completion, of divine fullness. Ezekiel is saying that God's victory will be total, complete, without remainder. Ezekiel was drawing on a deep prophetic tradition, one that stretched back through generations of Israelite prophecy. He did not invent the idea of a northern enemy, he inherited it. Jeremiah had warned of a foe from the north, a destroyer of nations on the move, coming to make the land a desolation. Jeremiah chapter 4 reads like a preview of Ezekiel's Gog oracle. Isaiah spoke of a day when the Lord would punish the host of heaven and the kings of the earth, a cosmic reckoning that went far beyond any single historical conflict. Ezekiel gathered these prophetic threads and wove them into something new, a final, climactic vision of God's ultimate triumph over organized evil. Gog is not one king, Gog is every king. Magog is not one land, Magog is every land that sets itself against God. And this is where modern interpretation took a wrong turn, not out of malice, but out of eagerness, out of a very human desire to make the ancient text speak directly to our own anxieties. When we read ancient prophecy through the lens of today's headlines, we can make it say almost anything. Russia invades? That is Gog. Iran threatens? That is Persia. Turkey shifts politically? That is Togarmah. The text becomes a mirror for our fears instead of a window into God's character. But if we step through that temptation, if we resist the urge to decode and instead choose to listen, something far more profound begins to emerge. Something that changes not just how we read prophecy, but how we understand God Himself. Now we arrive at the hidden layer, the piece of this prophecy that most interpretations completely overlook, and it changes everything. Because the prophecy of Gog and Magog does not appear only in Ezekiel. It resurfaces centuries later in the final book of the Bible, Revelation chapter 20. And what the Apostle John does with Ezekiel's vision is the key to understanding what it was always about. In Ezekiel, Gog attacks a restored Israel from the far north, a specific direction, a specific coalition. But in John's vision, chapter 20, John takes this same imagery and does something stunning. A people described as living in safety, dwelling without walls, at rest, and then the enemy comes. John reinterprets this scene in Revelation. He writes that Satan will be released and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. John takes Ezekiel's northern enemy and universalizes it, the four corners of the earth. Not one direction, not one coalition, every direction, every opposition. The symbolism is unmistakable. This is no longer about geography. This is about the final cosmic confrontation between God and every force that has ever opposed his purposes. Gog and Magog have become a title, a name for the ultimate rebellion whenever and wherever it occurs. The Greek text makes this universality explicit. John is not predicting a specific war. He is revealing a pattern, the pattern of evil's final futile gathering against the people of God. And the outcome is never in doubt. And just as in Ezekiel, fire comes down from heaven. The battle is over before it begins. No angelic army is deployed, no human weapon is raised. God speaks, and it is finished. Reflectively, the battle ends not with a military victory report, but with silence, with aftermath, with the quiet truth that every force that rose against God has been unmade, not by superior firepower, but by superior being. And here is the layer that most people miss entirely, the overlooked heart of the whole prophecy. The prophecy was never primarily about the enemy. It was always about God. It was always about revealing who God is, not just what God does. The God who does not need Israel to fight. The God who does not need angelic armies to win. The God whose very presence is the end of all opposition. That is the God Ezekiel was revealing to a people who thought they had been abandoned. 7 times in these 2 chapters, God declares the same phrase, "They shall know that I am the Lord." 7 times. 7 times. That is not a military objective, that is a revelation objective. The entire purpose of the Gog and Magog prophecy is not to defeat an enemy, it is to reveal the character of God to every nation on earth. The point of the prophecy is not destruction, it is recognition. It is the moment when every eye sees, every knee understands, and every heart knows, this is God, this has always been God. After the fire falls and the enemy is consumed, Ezekiel describes a scene of extraordinary restoration. Israel is gathered, the land is healed, the people are at peace. Not because they won a war, but because God made himself known. Imagine hearing these words as an exile in Babylon. You have lost your homeland, you have lost your family's burial ground, you have lost the sound of Hebrew worship in the streets of Jerusalem. And in that darkness, everything inside you asks, is God still God? And then your prophet stands up and declares, a day is coming when every enemy that has ever risen and every enemy that ever will rise will be gathered, and God alone will end it, not with your strength, with his. That even the worst evil imaginable, the total, global, 4 corners of the earth kind of evil, cannot outlast the faithfulness of God. This is the sacred turn. This is the moment when the prophecy stops being about geopolitics and starts being about the deepest question any human being has ever asked. Is good stronger than evil, and will it hold? The prophecy operates on 2 levels simultaneously, and most modern readings only see one. There is the surface level of armies and nations and fire from heaven, and there is the deeper level. On the surface, there are horses and swords and vast coalitions. These are the things that grab our attention, that make us want to match them with headlines. And that surface level is real, but it is not the point. But beneath the surface, something far more profound is being communicated. The God who made everything, the God who holds the stars in their courses, that God has not forgotten his people, and he never will. So, what does this mean for us? For the person watching this right now, living in a world that feels increasingly unstable, increasingly threatening, increasingly out of control. Every generation has looked at the chaos of its own time and thought, this must be it. This must be the fulfillment. These must be the armies of Gog assembling on the borders of the Holy Land. In the 1940s, it was Hitler's armies. In the 1960s, it was the Soviet Union. In the 1990s, it was Saddam Hussein. In 2001, it was global terrorism. In 2022, it was the invasion of Ukraine. Every decade produces a new candidate for Gog. Every prediction attached the prophecy to a current crisis, and every prediction was eventually replaced by the next crisis. The names change, the headlines shift, but the pattern of misapplication remains the same. But the prophecy was never designed to be a news ticker. It was never intended to make you a better predictor of geopolitical events. That was never its purpose, not even close. When we force ancient sacred literature into the mold of modern political commentary, we do not unlock the text, we shrink it. We reduce a cosmic revelation to a cable news segment. We lose something precious. We lose the actual message, the message that Ezekiel bled to deliver and that John sealed with tears on the island of Patmos. We trade an encounter with the living God for a guessing game about maps and missiles. Prophecy in the Bible was never given to satisfy curiosity about the future. It was given to build trust in the character of God. I know what is coming, and I am not afraid, and neither should you be, because the one who holds tomorrow is the same one who held yesterday, and he has not changed. Not so that you would scan the news with a Bible in one hand and a red marker in the other, but so that you would put the marker down and rest. The message of Gog and Magog, properly understood, is one of the most comforting promises in all of Scripture, and we have turned it into one of the most anxiety-producing. Even when evil gathers its full strength, even when it assembles from every corner and brings every weapon, it is not enough. It has never been enough, and it never will be. Even when the nations rage and the armies mass and the darkness feels complete, God does not negotiate with evil. He does not manage it. He does not contain it. He ends it completely. The weapons become fuel for ordinary life. The battlefield becomes a burial ground that is cleansed. The land that was threatened becomes the land that is healed. That is the trajectory of every prophetic promise in Scripture. Not destruction as the final word, but restoration. This is not a prophecy of fear. This is a prophecy of the most radical, stubborn, unbreakable hope the world has ever known. It is the declaration that the story does not end with the enemy's advance. It ends with God's answer. They shall know that I am the Lord. That is the promise written over every page of Ezekiel 38 and 39. That is the promise echoed in Revelation 20. And that is the promise that every generation of God's people has been invited to stake their entire lives upon. The prophecy of Gog and Magog is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a promise to be believed, not a code to be cracked, but a hand to be held. The hand of a God who has already declared the end from the beginning. If you have been taught to read this prophecy with fear, to see it as a countdown clock to catastrophe. I want to invite you to read it again, not with new information, but with new ears. Read Ezekiel 38 and 39 again, slowly, carefully, with the exiles sitting beside you in your imagination. Feel what they felt, hear what they heard. Not as a code to be cracked with a modern almanac, but as a letter written to people in the darkest night of their lives. People who needed to know, desperately needed to know that God was still God. Read it as a letter from a prophet to the brokenhearted, a letter that says, the worst thing you can imagine is not the last thing that will happen. God is the last thing that will happen, and God is good. A letter that says, the enemies are real, and the darkness is real, and the threat is real, but none of it is ultimate. None of it gets the final word. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. You are not left to face the gathering storm alone. The God who made the heavens fights for you, and he has never lost. This has been Faith, and the truth we carry forward is this. The prophecy of Gog and Magog is not a warning that evil is coming. It is a promise that evil has already lost. That even when evil gathers every army from every corner of the earth, it will break, not against the walls of any human city, but against the unshakable, unbreakable, undeniable reality of the living God.